This episode is sponsored by Legends Apparel. We are excited to have Legends as our apparel partner for 2022. Legends just dropped their Relay Performance short this summer. Now with water repellent technology, you can confidently add water training into your routine without switching up your gear or having to sacrifice on comfort. I've been using Legends gear for close to 2 years now. I am an absolute huge fan of their stuff. I'm wearing a pair of their shorts right now. In fact, you have a hard time finding me walking around in the gym, at home, without Legends gear on. Not only is it comfortable, but it looks great, high on fashion, high on performance as well. Check out their latest colorways, including the Animal Instincts collection at legends.com, and follow them on Instagram for new apparel and collaborations. Welcome to the Power Monkey Podcast, where we chat with the best in the world about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host, Mike Service, and on today's episode, we have two-time podium finisher at the CrossFit Games, Brent Fikowski. Now, Brent is one of the most recognizable athletes that there is in the CrossFit space. He's been to the Games many times as an individual, and as I mentioned, he's finished twice on the podium, once in 2017 with a silver, and then again in 2021 with a bronze. We talk a little bit about what it's been like to chase that elusive gold, why 2022 was a little bit of a down season for him, and what it's going to take for him to get back on the podium. We also talk a little bit about some of his other interests in terms of athlete rights. He's the athlete that started the Professional Fitness Athletes Association to give more awareness and athlete rights to those out on the competition floor so that they can compete on a level playing field no matter where they are around the world. It's something that is absolutely critical for the expansion and the growth of the sport, and it's great to see an athlete like Brent taking the charge and leading the helm when it comes to athlete rights. He's incredibly intelligent, well-spoken, has a lot of great thoughts in terms of where the sport can be going, and I hope you guys enjoy this episode as much as me and Mike did. What's up, Brent? How you doing, man? Thanks for being on the podcast with Mike and I today.
Hello. I'm doing good. Yeah, I'm doing really good.
We had a nice little chat before we even hit the record button. I think we missed out on a lot of great conversations, but we'll jump into maybe some of those topics. First one we want to ask is your nickname, the Professor. Where does that come from?
Yeah, it was sort of given to me by the CrossFit gym I trained at when I first started CrossFit Broad Beach in Australia. So I went to that gym, started training there in April of 2012. And after a couple months, they started calling me the Professor. That's how they say it in Australia. And their R's are A's and their A's are R's sometimes. And yeah, it was just kind of because, I was going to university, studying to be an accountant. And just kind of immediately within the first few months, I was like, counting reps per minute and was always just like really analytical about everything. And it was just sort of a bit of a light ribbing. And it just sort of stuck. It's not the worst nickname. So yeah, it stuck.
We were having a little side wager. We thought it was going to be because your favorite TV show was Gilligan's Island, but I lost that bet. And so that's only going to be a joke that people over 40 get. All of our young listeners have no idea what Gilligan's Island is. So, Mike?
I don't know. Maybe we don't have any young listeners, though. I think
It's true.
We're like an open to masters dominated podcast. So
I guess so. But Australia, how long were you out there?
Yeah, I lived in Australia for 17 months. I finished my accounting degree there and kind of went there with my best friend who I played volleyball with. So the plan was to go there and have a good time, finish our degrees and play a bunch of beach volleyball. We ended up playing a little more indoor than we did beach, which is what we mostly played here in Canada. And I sort of stopped playing indoor for a bit and found CrossFit, really enjoyed it and just sort of transitioned from training in volleyball to training for CrossFit competitions. And I actually met my wife there as well. So now she lives with me here in Canada.
Your wife is Australian?
Yes. Yeah.
I heard that your wife is a gymnast as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. So she grew up, doing gymnastics. And when we met, she was coaching gymnastics while she was going to university to be a nurse. And she was involved in like some circus stuff. So she was pretty good at silks.
Oh, nice. That's what my wife does.
That was her main thing for sure. And she was never like a, national level gymnast or something, like maybe didn't quite make the Olympics like yourself, Dave, but it was a big part of her life growing up, just in the same way that like swimming and volleyball were for me. It was always something I did. And like, my sister coached and we were just always around the pool. Neither of us made the Olympics with it, but.
Oh, that's very cool. We got to get your wife. What's your wife's name?
Claire.
We got to get Claire to meet up with Sadie. Maybe we can get you both at the Power Monkey Camp. We actually have two sets of silks that are set up at all times at Power Monkey Camp. And
Oh, cool.
Jordan and Mike have both taken lessons on silk. Is that correct, Mike?
This is true, and we also have a beach volleyball court there, so I feel like all
Yeah.
your angles are covered to come hang out with us.
I've been wanting to. I mean, obviously, once the games is over, you're very sore and tired. But like on the Monday after the games, there's a couple CrossFitters that used to play competitive volleyball, and so I've been kind of wanting to like set up a beach game with like, well, like who used to play? I mean, some of these girls don't compete anymore, but Lindsay Valenzuela did, Andrea Agar, Amanda Barnhart, Sydney Mikulishin. There's quite a few. I'm missing a few. That's just off the top of my head. So there's enough. I think it's mostly just me and a bunch of girls. But
Like a
it'd be still fun. Like I love playing beach, and it's fun to play just kind of recreationally and goof around.
And they added beach to NCAA now. So, I mean,
Oh, I didn't
did
know that.
you?
That's cool.
Yeah, a few years back they have 2-on-2 as a NCAA sport now. But
That's
you
awesome.
played indoor. Did you play collegiately?
Yeah, so I played 2 years at a college. Didn't see much time. I'm not going to brag about some crazy accomplishment there. When I was in high school, I was one of the taller guys on the team, so I played middle. And then when I went to college, they're like, no, you're short here, so you have to learn like some of the
You're
skills that
short.
you. Yeah, I was 6'2", and so most of the middles are like 6'8". So then had to kind of transition to more of a all around skill position like left side, right side, and so those first 2 years didn't really. I was a bit of a serving sub, bit of a defensive sub for like some of the middles, but didn't see a lot of court. But it was a lot of fun.
Have a different interpretation of short. I think
It's all relative, man.
very very low to the ground over here in Hobbitville. So 6'2" to me is a tower. Uh, Mental side of the sport. I was listening to you on another podcast not too long ago and talking a little bit about, how you did at the games and kind of preparation and that kind of stuff. And it seemed like you do analyze things quite a bit. And I think that nickname that was given to you in Australia is fairly appropriate. And I'm curious from your side how much time you spend on mental training and some things that kind of allow you to make sure that that's a component of your training that's on par with how much time you're putting in the gym from the physical side.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been thinking about that a little bit more this week as I've got a few competitions coming up, and I'll be completely honest. It's something I sometimes neglect. Um, what's interesting? I was thinking about it the other day, like trying to find an analogy, and mental training is something that. So let me put it to you this way: with flexibility, kind of once you have it, and if you're just in the gym every day, you probably don't need to continue to work on it. There's not really a lot of maintenance that necessarily needs to go into like a certain threshold of flexibility once you've achieved it. Like if you have just good squat mechanics and you're in the gym all the time, like squatting, it's just more or less going to stay the same and you'll be fine. But with mental training, no matter how good you think you are mentally, you do have to continue to do some form of upkeep. It's like brushing your teeth sort of thing. Um, and I admittedly sometimes do not do that enough. So there'll be, stretches where I'm not doing anything like specifically for my mental game. Leading up to a competition, I'll kind of ramp that up and just more so like check in, do some journaling. And I just have like a series of notes I go back to from like prior competitions that kind of allow me to look at what I learned. So I made a bunch of notes, for example, after the games this year on what I did wrong, what I wish I would have done differently. And sort of reading that as a way for me to, it's almost like talking to my future self or like, talking to my past self in a way and giving myself advice like, oh, it would have been better if you went into this event with more aggression or more confidence or, with a little more like having a plan B. So I don't have like, it is an area that I have a few ideas. I'm not going to like get into detail on them on how to have like a more consistent practice. If that makes sense. Something I sometimes take for granted because I do think it's kind of a strength of mine where I feel like more often than not, like even this year's games, I probably didn't put quite as much emphasis on mental training before the games. But when I look back, I don't think that was still really the the piece that was responsible for most of my woes at the games this year. It was probably like 2% of the issue, whereas the other 98% was mostly in regards to like how I trained leading up to the games, and then that was just kind of put on display.
I
Bunch of
gotcha.
answers there.
No, it makes sense. I'm just curious if you do a lot of this on your own. We're seeing is like so many specialists come into the world, whether that's specialists on technique or sleep regimen or the mental side. Do you ever try and outsource some of those things, working with a specific coach? You seem to do a lot of it on your own. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've worked with a bunch of different people for sure. Like there's some people in Kelowna that I've worked with. I've worked with Tom Foxley from Mindset RX. Um, growing up, I did in high school, the volleyball coach I had, we did like mental training like twice a week. So we'd go in a classroom and we'd visualize and we'd talk about, oh gosh, all sorts of things like, what zone we were in. We had like red light, green light, yellow light. As like green light is when everything's going great and you're in a great mood and, everything's flowing. Or like, reset button. So what do you do when you make a mistake? How do you make sure you reset and get yourself to stay in the green for the next play? How do you get out of a red zone? Visualizing success, all these sorts of things. And so like I kind of go back to a lot of those things that I've just learned over the years. So it's not, I can't really say it's stuff that I just know. It's stuff that I've learned from different people. And, I've taken journaling ideas from Tom Foxley and, and I'll just listen to podcasts as well, like the high performance podcast, and maybe take something out of that and, kind of just add it to my routine. But it's definitely not something I have like a concrete structure for, which is, it's on the list of things that I want to work on before, leading into semis in the games, so to speak. But right now it's a little bit disjointed when compared to something like, what did I do in training today and why? That's a lot. That has a lot more external people, working with different coaches to kind of like put all those pieces together and make sure I'm, doing the sets and reps that need to be done in the right way.
I'm curious. I want to know from you, Mike, and from you, Brent, because when I was an athlete, one of the things, I think it's a learning process for any athlete to figure out what kind of athlete you are in terms of what puts you into that green space, right? What gives you that green light? And it's not always about like everything being perfect or everything always being happy. And you mentioned this a little bit off air that, you're a little bit of a pessimist and maybe like that attitude can sometimes fuel success. Like I know what type of athlete I am. And it took me my whole career to figure out that I performed well when I was kind of like almost angry going into the competitions. Like I performed better when I was like attacking rather than just being in this like great mood. Hey, everything's all right. I'm going in, smiling to the crowd, waving, just trying to feel like making believe that being happy was going to lead to success. And it took me a while to figure that out. Like, how do you perform best? What attitude do you, what mental state do you need to be in? I want to ask you, Mike, first. Mike, you're just like the nicest, kindest, always most optimistic person that I know. Is that the same the way that you used to compete? Just like, if I'm happy, I'm going to do well.
I really appreciate that compliment there, Dave.
Of course, Mike.
Yeah, no, I was just, as you were talking and then thinking about Brent saying that you can have a bit of a side of pessimism to your morale at times. As a competitor, I was like probably bipolar. There were times that I was super grumpy and just gave everybody the evil eye and don't talk to me, don't look at me, don't do anything, and performed well. And there were times that I had that attitude and completely crapped the bed. And then there were times where I was just joking and having fun and did really well. And there were times where I was joking and having fun, did really bad. It was probably, I think I was probably finding where that balance is. I would say I always have leaned towards, though, keeping things a little bit lighter on the mental side. I'd be curious to hear from you, Brent, on the maybe like on the visualization side of things. So like from the gymnastics world, visualization I think is a really big component, visualizing your routine, things like that. There's a lot of weightlifters that would visualize. I was horrible at visualizing. I would miss warm-up attempts in my visualization, like 90 kilo snatches I would miss while I was trying to like warm myself up mentally for the competition. I'm like, how do you miss that? You don't miss that in person. Like, how can you not have that much brain power? So that would actually mess with me. So I stopped trying to visualize competitions after probably a couple years of failed visualization attempts on my own, but I also never worked with anybody on that, which maybe that would have been helpful. So yeah, curious for you, especially visualization from my side of things.
Yeah, I mean, so to circle back with the happy or sad thing, I think something I've learned, and I've made mistakes in competition for sure over the past 10 years competing in CrossFit. There have been competitions at times where I've tried to be someone else, where I've tried to force a mental, set of mental mantras or like a feeling or a mood onto myself that someone else told me was how champions are supposed to think. And it was completely ill-advised. The advice I was given was completely incorrect, more so because of their lack of understanding that, you know, at that time when they started working with me, I was a champion. You know, I'd made it to the games. I'd been on the podium. You know, I'd won regionals. It's like, yeah, I wasn't a world champion, but for all intents and purposes, I was, you know, a winner. And then they were trying to, you know, change that as if there was like a new gear mentally. And, you know, I think there's something to be said about like sharpening the saw and trying new things. But, you know, I remember I've listened to an interview with a powerlifter, and he was talking about when he competes, when he deadlifts and gets ready to squat, he would visualize all the hate and all the anger in his life and use that to lift the bar. And then in that same podcast, the other guy's kind of laughing, and he's like, I'm the exact opposite. I would picture love, and both of them were very successful. So neither of them were wrong, right? It wasn't I'm right, you're wrong. It was just like, there's two different ways to do it. As far as visualization goes, so on that topic, on what I just said, it's like, if you're listening to this and, you know, you want to take something away, take something home with you, you know, you need to figure out what works for you. And, you know, I think there's general things that, everyone can work on. Like, it's like, you know, have a plan B. What are you going to do when something goes wrong? Like, doesn't mean you visualize failure. Ideally, you're not visualizing yourself missing a 90-kilo snatch, but as a weightlifter, maybe it's like, what am I going to do if I miss my opener? Right? Or what is my plan? What is my mentality going to be if I'm in the back and I go, okay, I'm going to hit 70%, 80%, and then you fail 85, and then you fail 90, and you have to walk out and hit 92. Like, what's my mentality? And so, like, that's there's this, anyway, so that's something you can still, like, you can visualize, you know, adversity and overcoming adversity. Like, Michael Phelps swam a race with his goggles came off and he won. How did you do that? He's like, well, I visualized that race and I knew how many strokes it took me to get to the wall. So speaking of visualizing, good segue. When I was a swimmer growing up, I you know, I could visualize some of my races within like a second or two, because we just visualized all the time, you know, our main races we were going to do, like you said, with your gymnastics routine. And we would do that in volleyball too. You know, we'd visualize serving, we'd visualize, you know, doing something in a high pressure situation when the game is tied. With CrossFit, it's a little harder because you don't know what the workouts are. Mm-hmm. But like leading up to regionals, historically, I would go to a float tank and I would visualize the workouts because we usually knew those like a week or two in advance. And so I would visualize myself doing those workouts and like the strategies and when I was going to take a chalk break and how I was going to split up the whatever power snatches or what style of burpee I was going to do. So it wouldn't be quite as precise as, you know, visualizing a, you know, swimming race within a fraction of a second or something like that. But, you know, I would do that. And I still do that. I still try to, I do more writing now where I, you know, whenever I think of things, like if I'm prepping for, let's say, an open workout and I have 2 days to prep for it, you know, I get on my computer and I type out, okay, how am I going to break it up? How am I going to pace this? How long should this take me? I might go look at some old video of the last time I did, you know, 50 burpees in the middle of a workout. I'm like, oh, the split there was, you know, 3 minutes. So it's like, I know that's going to take me about 3 minutes. And this was the style I did. So I'd write that down. And in what, like watching those old videos and typing all of that out, that's kind of more my process, because by the time, that's like kind of all you have time to do. You know, you don't, by the time you do all that and make all those plans and you run through that plan and you read it multiple times, that's usually enough for me, because there's not like a significant amount of like days to really like run through the workout in its totality, like, you know, sitting with like cross-legged on a yoga mat kind of thing.
So there's a lot there. I think that's incredibly helpful for someone out there to be able to pick and choose, right? Pick the things that work best for you. You know, it's not this universal thing that's going to be just, you know, visualization work for you. It didn't work for Mike. And, you know, mentality wise, you really have to play around with a lot of things before you start to figure out who you are as an athlete. You mentioned something earlier about your upcoming schedule, and this podcast is actually going to be coming out right when you're maybe flying, maybe you're already arrived in Egypt for Elfit, which is coming up next week. And I think it starts a pretty crazy line of competitions for you over the next few months. You have Egypt, November, Dubai, December, Wodapalooza, January. So you have 3 major competitions in 3 months that are on opposite sides of the world. Was this done intentionally? I mean, and then obviously you have the games, the Open coming up shortly after that. Was this done intentionally to prep for the Open? And kind of what's the thought process behind doing three major competitions in three different places so close together prior to getting ready for the season?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's a good idea. The kind of the after the game's finished, you're always kind of looking at the off season that always, feels a little longer until you're in the middle of it. One of the things that and hopefully this doesn't come to bite me in the butt, but historically the last few years, I've made sure that I will qualify for semis through the Open and quarters. And there were times when, like in 2018, where I was pretty close to not making it to regionals, and then ended up winning regionals and coming fourth at the games. But the Open was like a weakness for me, that online competition, the style of events, and just a bunch of other factors, not for lack of trying. It was never for lack of effort, but just usually the style of workouts, and other people seemed to succeed. And then I'd see them a couple weeks later and I'd beat them in live competition. So whether it was something I was doing wrong or something they were doing right, who knows? But, so I think this year, part of our decision was, I didn't have a great prep for this last year's Open and quarters. And I still qualified like pretty easily to semis. And so we sort of decided, coaching staff were like, we're not going to really like consider the Open and quarters like a massive priority in the season, if that makes sense. Like, we're not going to taper for it really this year. We're going to sort of train through it a bit more. We don't have to do some like prep for it, and kind of like, yeah, there's just going to be a little bit less priority placed on that. And so we just sort of pretended almost that wasn't part of the season, other than the fact that it has to be done. And then we looked at the season, and the plan was to do Dubai and Wadapalooza. Those were the two. And then Egypt kind of came up as an opportunity. They reached out to me and wanted me to come. And I wanted to go to Dubai a couple weeks early anyway, just for the time change and some heat acclimatize to the heat. And Egypt was kind of, a little bit sooner than we planned to go, but thought I'd just kind of just go and, not do like a huge taper for that competition either. And, use that as an opportunity to dip myself into the heat there and the time change, and hopefully don't get banged up too much, and then just kind of continue to train through it, and then prioritize Dubai and Wadapalooza, and hopefully just kind of like regain a little bit of confidence. The games didn't go as well as I'd hoped. And last year I went the polar opposite, where I didn't do any off-season competitions, and the plan there was to sort of come out the other end a different animal, and didn't really work. So we're gonna try it this way.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that, Brent, before Dave did. If you had maybe the idea getting these three competitions in different settings with probably some different style workouts going into it, if that gives you a chance to even more mentally prepare a little bit differently for each competition, and then gather some feedback and data for yourself to then put into play for the next season.
Yeah, that's kind of what it is. And something else I've been thinking about more is honestly, like, these competitions, I only got so many more years left in me. I'm turning 32 in February. So I'm only going to be competing for another, I've been doing this for now, I think 10 and a half years. I won't be doing it for another 10 and a half. I can say that for a fact. I don't know how many more. I feel like I could probably do 5. Whether or not I get to 5 more is, who knows. But I kind of just wanted to have some fun, to be honest, make some money, have some fun, and like try not to like put so much pressure on the CrossFit Games. And a big part of it is like everyone's really good now. I feel like the men's field is a lot deeper, and it really just comes down to the workouts. Like, it's not something we talk about a lot, and it's kind of this like, oh, like if you're waiting for the workouts to be good for you, you're already a loser kind of like mentality. But like the workouts really matter. And there's, you go to a competition and there's, like let's say Rogue, right? There's a dozen guys there that if everything works out well, they could end up on the podium. But a lot of that depends on what's programmed. Is it a 1 max snatch or a 1 max deadlift? Like, you're going to have a totally different leaderboard with just 2 different 1 max with the same implement. Not to mention, is it ring muscle ups or is it bar muscle ups? Or is it bar muscle ups on a log or bar muscle ups on a pull-up bar? Those things, like all those little things, make a huge difference. So it's kind of like, like I could do 1 competition a year for the next couple years and hope it goes really well, and I have this like standout moment. And that's kind of what I did last year, and it really didn't happen. You know, the CrossFit Games just didn't go well. And some of that was programming. Most of it was definitely just my own prep. But it wasn't for lack of trying. And so I'm like, you know what? Why don't I just go to Dubai, go to Wadapalooza, have some fun, do my best, try to win some money, have some cool experiences. Because at the end of the day, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, all I'm really going to remember is the experiences, and no one else is really going to remember anything. You know, I'm just going to have some pictures to show for it and some medals and some cool memories. So I might as well make them, and maybe focus like a little less on having this like idealized preparation and training, because you know, you could have ideal prep, and if the workouts are crap for you, it doesn't matter anyway. Like,
I love that. I love that. Go ahead, Mike. I just wanted to make a comment, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was just say just what you said there is, you know, I retired from weightlifting almost 10 years ago now, and yeah, my memories are from my favorite competitions, whether I did good or bad. You know, who I hung out with, who I had an interesting conversation with pre or post competition, and probably my only regrets when I think about it are not having competed more when I had opportunities to take, you know, an extra trip to go to a competition that I didn't feel ready to peak for. So I didn't want to, you know, embarrass myself because maybe other people would be in better shape, or and especially now where you know, all of you as competitors can oftentimes see more what everybody's doing, you know, through social media also. And so it looks like they're in really good shape. And, you know, maybe you can even expand on that a little bit if that has any impact on you. But that would impact me a lot as an athlete. And it wasn't even, you know, crazy Instagram age yet. It was just like, oh, I've seen some videos on YouTube of a few of the guys in my weight class, and they look really good. I probably need to hold off like one more competition to be ready to compete against them. And now when I think about it, I'm like, yeah, that's so stupid, because you just missed an opportunity to, express yourself in a setting and sport that you love.
Yeah. I mean, that's really like everything you just said is kind of what went through my mind. And, you know, the reality is like I could have the perfect season, do everything right. And if the workouts are a certain way at the games next year, I won't win the games. You know what I mean? Like, and all of us can say that. You know, I don't think there's an athlete other than maybe Tia. You know, if everything you hate happens to be programmed in a certain way, and everything you love is programmed in like just the wrong way, it's like you're not going to win. And really, the only thing I haven't done at the CrossFit Games is win. Right. So it's not like I'm chasing some other thing, right? It's like I've come second, I've come third, I've come fourth. I mean, I guess I could chase fifth. You know,
new goal.
I've won, you know, I've won events at the games. Like I've kind of checked a lot of boxes as far as like cool experiences at the CrossFit Games. But it's like, oh, I've never competed as an individual in Wadapalooza, you know, and I've never been to Egypt. I've always wanted to go to Egypt, and you know, it's a huge event. There's hundreds of people there, and I've also, you know, I'm saying to my wife Claire, I'm like, other than semis in the games or in regionals where it's very important you do well. So you're intentionally like staying away from crowds. You're trying to stay tunnel focused. You're trying to focus on your performance. You know, and Egypt's going to kind of be an opportunity for me to kind of just try to embrace and have a bit of fun being a rock star, to be completely honest. You know, like it's not something I've been able to like appreciate. And it's something I said to Claire, I'm like, hey, for these couple of years where people like are excited to get a selfie with me, which is such a bizarre thing because I don't really see myself that way, but that's kind of a privilege. And it's a cool opportunity that there's going to be, you know, maybe 100 people or more that are just going to be ecstatic, just be like, never thought I was going to see a CrossFit Games athlete in Egypt kind of thing. Right. So try to embrace that and try to enjoy that. And I think that might add a little bit of love to the sport. I definitely found myself getting a little jaded just with the sport in general and my own, you know, perception of training, and, you know, just training in my garage every day for a year, just pounding away, just banging my head against the floor on handstand push-ups. You know, it's kind of nice to, you know, nice to get out there and, you know, maybe run around the pyramids, right? Like cool opportunity like that could be something pretty special.
Without a doubt. Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick, because I think that's so important for people to hear. One, that, you know, you admitted it's a privilege to be recognized and idolized a little bit by people, and that's such a unique experience. And if you can take it for what it is, you don't want to give up that privilege, because that's the worst thing to do. when you have something that a lot of other people dream of or could never imagine of having, and if you don't actually use it, it's like a waste. It's wasted for the universe. Nobody gets it. So
Yeah.
like it's actually, some people maybe wouldn't take that perspective, but the older I get, I definitely do. Like when you have an opportunity like that other people would kill for, if you can realize that that's so special, and then you enjoy it, and you understand that that's going to be special for the people that are going to be in Egypt, some of them competitors that would never get to compete with you, and then people that are there to watch, like that's really, really special for them. So that's a cool perspective for you to take into that. That's really nice to hear.
We're out in Germany right now, and we've been touring Europe for the last week, and we have another week out here, and we're actually out at one of our my Olympic gymnastics buddies that's become part of our Power Monkey family, Fabian Hambuchen, who's 3-time Olympic medals. Those are not my Olympic medals up on the wall behind me. That's Fabian's gold, silver, and bronze from 3 different Olympic games on high bar. The dude is an absolute gymnastics legend. But we're at his house, and he's a CrossFitter now. His wife is very in the CrossFit world. One of his friends is here. They're all downstairs, and they heard that we were going to be in a podcast with Brent Fikowski, and they were so excited. You have fans all over the world that are dying to meet you. So the idea of you being able to go to Egypt and be able to actually interact with them, you're going to make people's lives. So that kind of thing, absolutely take advantage of it. But I'll say this from my side of it too, being done with the sport. And we were talking about with Fabian earlier, we get this question a lot. Like, if you could go back and compete, would you do it all over again? What do you miss most about those years when you were actually competing at the highest level? Different answers from a lot of different athletes, but I will say universally, just about everyone will say that they miss the places and the people that they got to meet along the way. Mm-hmm. Where you get to go and being able to see the way other people live, and being able to interact with people that you don't get to interact with on a daily basis in your own little bubble, wherever you're from, has been one of the most fulfilling things that I got to do as an athlete, and that we get to continue to do with Power Monkey now. So traveling now, like the courses, the people, the places we get to go see, go to Egypt, go to Dubai, go do these things for as long as you possibly can, because I guarantee you're going to remember that more than you're going to remember being on the podium. Even, believe it or not, you're going to remember that stuff even more. So I think you have the complete correct mindset, just coming from an athlete that's no longer competing. Those are the things that are really close to my heart now that I'm done.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting balance. And I've said no to so much over the last, 8 years, 7 years for sure. And I don't really regret saying no to a lot of those things. And a lot of the time, my rationale was, I'm like, the only reason I'm getting offered these things is because I win. So there's this very interesting balance when you get to a point of success in CrossFit. I'm sure it's the same in a lot of other sports, but CrossFit's kind of unique because you get to choose a lot of like your season and how you train. And, it's not like you're part of an NBA team where it's like everything's kind of told. There's a lot of requirements on what you have to do. And so a lot of the times I'd say no, and I'm like, what I'd always say is, I'm like, the only reason, you want my autograph is because I win. The only reason you want, and because, those people downstairs like are excited to meet me is because I've won, and because I've won, I've got on a documentary or whatever. And the things that made me win was training alone in the gym. That's what works for me. So I do need to continue to do that. And it doesn't mean I can't, find time to live a little bit. And that is one of my, priorities this year, is to, live a little bit more and not go quite as stir crazy. But there's definitely a balance there where I've seen other athletes, maybe have like a successful CrossFit Games, and then you see them like freaking bouncing around all over the place. This was a couple of years ago. I'm not going to name any names, but they're bouncing around. They're doing all this stuff. They're doing tours. They're doing meet and greets and all, like bang, 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 bang. Hopefully I don't fall into that trap too much this year. And they don't have so great of a season, and I think I know enough about how I need to train that hopefully that doesn't happen to me this year. I'm aware it's definitely a possibility. Yeah, there's a fine balance there. But like you said, I mean, the things that, when I look back to the last time I went to Dubai, I remember some of the competition experiences, but I also remember meeting Ahmed. He took my wife and me out to the desert, and we had like this barbecue and stuff like that. And it's like, it was a couple days before the event started, and that was probably, maybe the best part of the trip, So, but there are also moments on the competition floor that, you cherish as well. Little things that,
Oh,
little experiences you have with a judge. But
I think that's also nice. I think that's also true. And just to maybe give you some positive reinforcement. So our friends that are here that are pumped that they know we're up here talking to you, I would say they got exposed to you because you win. But all of them said, yeah, he seems like a really good guy. And that it's I think that starts to come out. So it's like, yeah, people want, they want to meet you, they want to invite you, they want your autograph. But if you're not a cool person, and you're not likable, then that doesn't stay, because there's a lot of crazy good athletes that nobody likes, and they're like, yeah, cool, they win, we like to watch them compete, but that's it. I'm not going to go want to talk to them or anything.
Yeah, there's an intersection of competition success and, let's call it, marketability or likability, right? And ideally, you have both, where you're like you win, and then there's this marketability, likability aspect. And if you just have one or you just have the other, you're not going to maybe get the same kind of amount of opportunities, or quite frankly, sponsorships, right? It's like, if you're plain Jane, vanilla Wonder Bread, no personality, but you do pretty well, you're not going to maybe have the same sponsorships as someone who does a little worse than you, but is like the fan favorite. It's just kind of like this, the nature of the beast, and that happened long before social media too.
I think oh, sorry, Dave. I just one
go for it, Mike. Go for it.
I think it's like a common theme though that seems to come up with you, whether it's how you're looking back at your results, and I think being pretty observant of yourself, of your thoughts, being true to yourself. So you said when you went to some competitions, you took the advice to maybe be who you weren't, mentally, or persona. And I think that's true to everything. So if you're just, go to the competition, be you, compete the way you want, train the way you want, all of those things start to kind of tie themselves together. And just from before we started recording, that was already, I already wanted to be your buddy. So you it was cool to already hear a bunch of those things. And it's nice now to get some more depth into you, whether it's your training mentality, the way that you're looking back at your results and trying to grow and build. I think for Dave and I both, we can appreciate that because we're athletes turned, coaches, educators, and we want to see the full person when we talk to somebody and get to know them.
Well, Mike, you are Buddy the Elf, so I think you're ready to be friends with everybody. So
I'll try.
He goes in for the hug right away, so just be prepared. You mentioned a little bit about the competition side, where depending on what's thrown at you will dictate in a lot of cases who's going to be on the podium. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on potentially standardizing things a little bit more, and particularly in the cases of the IF3, the International Functional Fitness Federation. I'm sure you know a little bit about it. It seems like it could be something that puts a little bit more thought into what's coming up within a competition for an athlete prior, rather than this randomized anything and everything could be thrown at you, even things you've never seen before. You're going to get, you're going to have to throw a baseball as far as you possibly can next time, and good luck with that. Is there any thought to you as potentially that being a viable option in terms of standardization and creating an environment that gives an athlete like yourself a little bit more insight into what might come up in a training year? Just curious whether or not you see value in something like that.
Yeah, that is, we could easily talk about that for 3 hours. Where to start? So I think there's this intersect between what I would want, what maybe the average athlete would want. Maybe you survey, 1,000 athletes at a high level to mid level. And then the other aspect is there are groups of people that run events, whether it's, the German Throwdown or Dubai or Rogue or, CrossFit event, CrossFit Inc., the games, the semifinal organizers. And there has to be, there's going to be an intersect there, and you're going to have all sorts of different answers. My personal opinion is I think there's like a series of things that need to be improved upon at a variety of competitions. And one of them, I think eventually, is definitely some form of standardization of programming. How, because everyone complains about programming, but no one's willing to agree on a solution, right? Like, you're at a competition. I talked to some people who were at Rogue competing, and they were like, oh man, like we clean and jerked 3 times, right? We did DT, we did double or heavy grace, and then we did a log clean and jerk. Like that's like a lot of clean and jerks. Like why wasn't one of those, snatch variation or, that's just one example where it's like, oh man, this, you go to some competition like the Italian Throwdown in 2019, and every workout was under 7 minutes. You're like, holy smokes, where's the endurance? Or you go to some competition, it's all gymnastics, or it's no gymnastics, or it's all running, it's nowhere, And so everyone complains about it during the competition. We complain about it for a week after, and then we move on. And there's no real like progress. Now, I guess, in my opinion, the kind of the lowest hanging fruit for improving the competition experience for athletes is probably looking at like safety. So, like Scott Panchik rolling his ankle and hurting his knee on the rope climbs. It's like, how can we make sure that doesn't happen again? Or, if we're doing handstand push-ups, like, can we make sure that when your head is touching the ground, it's a soft surface? Because that seems obvious, and most competitions do it until one doesn't do it. And there's nothing to say that they can't do it. There's nothing to say that it can't be sandpaper. Or, or in the case of the games, there was nothing at all for your head, which I'm not saying is right or wrong, but I think that there are a lot of opportunities to create some standardization when it comes to like safety and even fairness. There's competitions where different lanes and different heats have these like massive advantages over the other lanes and the other heats. And that to me is like a much bigger priority and something that's a lot easier to fix than standardizing programming. Because even within the IF3, and I really like a lot of the things the IF3 does, even within the IF3, there's a pretty high degree of variance within the workouts year to year, which I think is fine. It's what we want. That's what we've come to expect as athletes and as fans. So I don't think that needs to change. The variance doesn't need to change, but I think there's a lot of opportunities for just like more standards and rules so that like things. And I think when I talk about these things to some people, there's a little bit of hesitation, and my like way to try to break that hesitation is, I'm just trying to make sure that everything kind of passes the smell test. When you go to a competition, you're like, yeah, that was fair, and that was like seems safe, and no one's like making any massive complaints. I'm like, I don't want to have this like massive departure from what we're familiar with seeing at, a regional or a semifinal or the CrossFit Games. But when you're creating, workouts or a series of workouts that have these like very apparent flaws, and especially safety flaws or fairness, where it's like, wow, that lane has like it way easier than someone else. They don't have to go as far. Like they don't have as much distance to travel. Like that needs to just never happen. And so it's more just to pass the smell test. Like, hey, the average of what we're used to seeing and like the good average will continue, and all those like really like oh, shaking my head, cover my eyes, what is going on, like we just need to get rid of those types of events. And I think that's the priority, and that'll take a year or 2 or 3. And then the programming standardization as like what is a balanced test of fitness, that's going to be a little more challenging to get all the competitions or more competitions on board that are not already on board with what the IF3 is doing.
And this seems like it's a broader question, and where you're going with your answers around the PFAA, which I think you help kind of start, the Professional Fitness Athlete Association, and trying to create a route for athletes to have a voice. And obviously, this is much more established within the Olympic realm. And I served as the athlete rep within the gymnastics space with the USOC for 10 years. I know kind of what goes into it from the gymnastics or the USOC side of things. But is the intention here with what you're trying to do is, one, create a voice for the athlete within this, and then within that, trying to make safety a priority? I'm curious, kind of maybe give me like 3 other things that you really feel are the main areas of focus within making sure that athletes have a bigger voice within this whole competitive scene.
Yeah, so that's definitely the long-term goal of the PFA. PFA has existed for 2 years, and like I'll be the first to admit, we haven't done as much as we could have done or should have done, but we're still working. We're all just volunteers, and it's hard to start something from nothing. And so some of the things we have done is, we were able to help convince CrossFit and Noble to, move the increase in prize money down from 21 through 40, first time that's ever been done. We were able to give coaches more access at the North Park at the CrossFit Games. So, the athletes had better access when they were in years past, like people probably don't know this, but when, as an athlete at Madison, when you competed at the turf, like the outdoor, your coach wasn't there with you in that warm-up area, which is, potentially a safety hazard. And, if things are changing last minute, especially for some of the young athletes, you've got teenagers there, like 17-year-old women competing against, people like myself who are, older, potentially an issue. So we were able to kind of vouch for that and help them make that change. We helped convince them to not have any minimum work requirements, so athletes weren't cut after paying their way to get to the games, and also to get some compensation from the Noble jerseys this year. There's still some negative feedback on that it maybe wasn't enough money or it wasn't for enough athletes, but it's a huge step in the right direction that an athlete's name and likeness has value to that athlete, and that it's not just the competition can't be slapping that person's name or face on an item and selling it without compensating the athlete. So, not to mention, we worked hard on getting pull-up bars and yoke heights, more options for athletes, which didn't work at semis, although we put in a lot of hours to try to make that happen, but we did see the improvement at the CrossFit Games. So those are some things we did do. Long term, as an athlete association, it's kind of an interesting, we're in an interesting sport because, quite frankly, so I signed up for Dubai and I'm excited to go. And I know what I signed up for, which is I don't know what I signed up for, so, you pay a $300 entry fee. I can't quite remember the amount. And there's no guarantee as to what I'm doing at all. I know I have to be there the day before for athlete registration, and then I'm competing for 3 days. You could just go on a 1K run, a 2K run, a 3K run, and do 100 jumping jacks for time, and that's 4 scored workouts. That's it. And there's nothing to say that, other than negative publicity, there's nothing to say that they won't do that. And so, there's nothing to say that it's not just going to be arm wrestling, or you could go on and on. So we're in this interesting space where, there really are no rules. There's no certified judges. I'm sure in gymnastics, it's a ridiculous amount of, steps and groups of people that monitor judges. You become a level 1 judge, a level 2 judge. You go through certifications, you're overseen, your work is looked after. And if you suck, you get bumped down. Right. And Dave's nodding his head if no one's watching the video.
It's the same in weightlifting.
It's the same in hockey. It's the same in, I used to be a referee for volleyball. It's the same with that, right? You start with junior high and someone watches you, and then if you do well enough, you go up to high school and you start getting paid a bit more, and so on. And so those processes just don't exist in this sport. So kind of some of the priorities that we have is, like, yes, ideally there's more of an athlete voice, but hopefully more so, kind of in the interim, in the first year or so here, some of the things we are working on is just to basically start creating those processes, and maybe having some of the more prominent athletes in the sport, such as myself, such as Vellner, and any other athlete that wants to be more vocal, or at least, just put their support behind what we're doing, to just say, like, hey, we want to progress towards these types of things, and these are some of the options, and this is what we recommend. And then hopefully getting as many competitions on board as possible, because I understand there's a competition, if you are the German throwdown, or not them in particular, but just any competition, like, you have a lot of work to do, right? You're just trying to break even, like, maybe you have a live stream, you're trying to sell tickets, you're trying to corral hundreds of volunteers and thousands of athletes, and it's like a whole production. And to just come up with the rules that define what your competition is just one more step that it's like, that's not really going to bring money in, because people aren't really expecting that yet. But long term, as an athlete, if you know what you're signing up for, and it's like a proven product, and you're not just going on faith that they're going to do the right thing because they more or less did the right thing last year, or even worse, they made mistakes last year, and you go, well, hopefully they learned from them, and then they didn't. Whether that's from a programming standpoint, or judging, or logistics. So I think there's ways to create standardization and provide those things to competitions to hopefully allow them to just function more efficiently, and the sport can grow in that way. And then in time, the athletes will have more of a voice when their voices need to be heard. But there's a lot of standardization that needs to happen, I think, before, as athletes, we're kicking and screaming for, I don't even know. It's hard to kick and scream about anything when there's no rules. It's all just kind of he said, she said, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, I want, that wasn't fair. And it's like, well, based on what?
Mm-hmm.
If you got railroaded by an appeal or a judge, it's like, well, can you blame them? The judge is a volunteer. Like, they were just briefed yesterday on this new movement standard, and they just messed it up. And it's not because they weren't, it just happened because the systems weren't there. Or when Scott Panchik, rolled his ankle or hurt his knee, it's like, yeah, that sucks. But like, if I had $1 million right now and I wanted to run a safe competition, how would I know it's safe? Like, where would I go to ensure that it was running at the utmost level of safety? Like, there's no way to really ensure that without, a series of like systems and practices being passed down. So it's kind of what we're working on here. It's going to take a long time. It's kind of boring, but hopefully there's some results this year.
Part of the growing pains of a developing sport. Like, if it wants to have legitimacy and longevity, it's like, look at any sport. Look at the National Football League, look at baseball, look at basketball. There's an evolution of standardization and best practices, and the evolution. And it's like you're kind of volunteering to be at the forefront of some of this to hopefully make the sport safer and more predictable in a good way.
Yeah. And what's funny, like when we talk about rules, a lot of people, start yawning and rolling their eyes and saying it'll take the fun out of it. And I'm like, man, I watch NFL games and I don't know. I've never read the rule book. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I can still
Mm-hmm.
watch it. I get the gist. It's like, oh, get the ball over there. 4 downs, 10 yards. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's not, and with CrossFit, it's like, oh, do these lifts, get to the finish line. Like, that's never going to change. But you can create, like, in CrossFit, you could create a freaking 500-page rule book pretty easily, with all the different theoretical, situations that could come up and how to appeal for everything and every movement and every combination and all these different things to look out for. At the end of the day, the finished product on the floor for a fan or an athlete, like, wouldn't change at all from what we're used to seeing, but it would just remove, hopefully, some safety stuff and, some lack of fairness or consistency in like judging. And, so that's what it would take. It's just, slow process.
I would actually argue that it would make the sport more entertaining to watch, in the sense that one of the struggles that we have with gymnastics is nobody knows what the hell's going on. Like, you watch a gymnastics meet and you watch one person go and it's, wow, that was amazing. Next person goes, wow, that was amazing. But I have no context as to how much better that person is, because everything is just too difficult for me to comprehend. So what you can do when you can start creating some standardization is you can create an expectation for the viewer to know what to look for. That's a critical piece. When you have such a new movement coming out all the time, which is exciting, because I mean, I love seeing so much gymnastics at this year's games and parallel bars involved. Just, that's my internal bias, like seeing that. But from viewers, like, what the hell am I even looking for? What is the standard? I've never seen anyone move across a set of parallel bars traversing, let alone like understanding what a standard is around it. So when the viewer can have a better understanding of exactly what to anticipate, they get into it more. They know what to look for.
Yeah.
Oh, that person messed up there because I know what a good rep is and a bad rep is. So it can create a more engaged viewer, in my sense, rather than this idea of CrossFit just being unknowable as part of the sport.
Yeah. And part of that comes to the announcers as well. And there have been competitions in the past at the CrossFit Games where, we are briefed on a movement standard and then we go out and do it, an hour later, and I'll watch the broadcast. And it's apparent that the broadcasters are not made aware of the standard.
Yeah.
And that's just a communication issue where it's like they need a liaison, or they need to be in the briefing with us so they hear what the athletes heard. They know what the judges were told the day or two prior. So they, like, the judge or the announcer needs to be as informed or more informed than anyone on the floor as to exactly what counts and what shouldn't count. It's obviously tough when, they're saying, oh, this will count, this won't count. And then maybe, a judge misses something, but that happens in every sport. It's no different than, in basketball. It's like, oh, who touched the ball last? They go to instant replay. They're like, well, referee missed it, human error. And that's not to, take a huge dig at the announcers. I think they do a great job. It's just like one other level to, ensuring that the finished product that is at least on a live stream can be, digested by the viewer. And obviously, like, the element of secrecy and like the unknown until the last minute, there's good aspects to that and there's bad aspects to that. And you have to try to mitigate the bad aspects by like having a at least to the viewer, as soon as it is no longer unknown, like the package of media, whether it's a series of video clips from a gym or maybe a demo athlete or someone explaining it, like, being able to really lay it out as simply as possible. And that's hard to do, to relay something that's complex in a concise manner to someone who's never seen it before. And then as an announcer, if you've never announced it before and you don't really know what's going to happen, it's like, oh man, like, how am I supposed to announce something that's happening like fast? It's a movement I've never talked about before. It's, it's like there's a lot going on. It's not an easy task. It'd be a lot easier, talking about, freaking golf, right? Like, let's be honest.
Yep.
It's a lot easier.
Without a doubt. And, the announcers are not put in a position to succeed a lot of times when it comes to new movements like that. You're exactly right. But there's one movement that I don't want to talk too much about CrossFit Games this past year and everything that happened, but there's one movement I want to ask you about because you reached out to me about it on Instagram, and I'm curious your thoughts about it. The new handstand push-up variation. Now, I put out a little video about it with some standards and some things to consider and ways to train it, and why I thought it was a good direction forward in terms from a technical side of things. But I'm curious from your side what the thought process was when you saw that movement and the standard that went along with it, what you thought when you had to perform it at the games.
Yeah, I mean, as an athlete, someone who's analytical and thoughtful with how they train in the sport. And now that I've been doing this for a while, I also sometimes put on my little, PFA hat, I guess. And I'm thinking about, like, how does this affect the sport, or how could this be better? And I have to kind of take that off when I'm competing and just focus on, like, what do I need to do to just try to get as many points as I can? And so with that movement, I saw it and I'm like, I know I'm not going to be very good at these. Handstand push-ups is something that I've been working very hard on, and I've attacked it in every possible way. And I'm trying it another way this year, but, everything from doing like hypertrophy, dumbbells, seated strict press with a barbell, push press, handstand holds, eccentrics, like you name it. I've done it all twice, probably done more overhead strict pressing than any athlete at the CrossFit Games. Like, I'm pretty confident of that. I just, for me, so as an athlete, you're watching other people do it. I get my coach to say, film it. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to give one a go, warm up, try one. I'm like, that was really hard. How'd it look? He's like, it looked really hard. And there really wasn't much more than that. You're watching other athletes do it. You're trying slightly different hand positions. You're trying to, maybe, squeeze your core or spread your feet out or put your hands here. But at the end of the day, it's like, I weighed 220 pounds and my shoulders weren't strong enough. And it wasn't any like technical limitation or lack of will. It was just like, you just are not good enough to rep these out in a way that's going to get you a lot of points. As far as, take that hat off and put on like the critical thinking hat, wall facing, obviously great addition. I think that's really cool. The fact that they were on a really high block put someone like Colton Mertens at a pretty massive disadvantage, because he had to do this like deficit wall walk just to get up there, to get started, which I found was a little, like, I don't know, kind of unnecessary. Not to say that, I don't know. I just found that kind of weird. It did, like, the block itself was, like 10 inches high, but you only had to do a 4-inch deficit handstand push-up. So I'm like, I don't know why the block wasn't just, 5 inches. But anyway, so I found that, I'm sure that was a little frustrating. It's like, oh, I'm good at this movement, but in order for me to like get into the position to do the movement, I have to do this like deficit walk, which I don't know. I just found that was strange. And then as far as the, I mean, I just think there should have been something for the head to touch, not from a safety standpoint or just from a judging standpoint. Like, you can buy, so typically when we do handstand push-ups, we do them on the Dollar mat, which is a, 1 3/4 inch mat, it's whatever, 5 centimeters thick. And it's quite firm. It's foam, but it's quite firm. It's like a wrestling mat, but you can get all sorts of foam. You can go to the foam store where they sell, I mean, hell, you could use the foam cubes that you guys
foam
use
store,
in your foam.
Neighborhood foam store.
No, you can get foam that is like incredibly fluffy, right? And so you can get like the foam that you guys have in your foam pits, where you can fall into them after trying a new skill. So you can get something like that, where as a judge, you can visually see when some of the athlete's body weight and not just their hair has compressed the foam enough to be like, oh, they've met the standard. but the foam is light enough that the athlete can't really gain an advantage from some type of like rebounding or bouncing. So I think if they just would have had a foam cube, I would have been like, this is awesome. Obviously I suck at it, but this is awesome. That's my only complaint. And I, you know, whatever their rationale was, I think they liked the idea of like not having anything. And I get that, but from a judging standpoint, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Right? It just,
I totally see what you're saying there. And as a viewer watching it, I don't know how judges even saw whether or not the person, because you needed to be almost floor level to see whether or not the person, right. You needed to be at the level of the line to really see whether or not the person cleared it. So it was a really challenging way for the judge to be put into a place where they could, effectively do a good job. So I agree with you, and I do think those foam blocks is a good suggestion in terms of not giving the person the ability to rebound. I'm not a big fan of rebounding off your head.
No, me neither.
Thousands of times. It's actually why I'm a big fan of seeing less and less kipping handstand push-ups in competitions these days, because I'm just moving towards more strict action is just, I think, universally a great idea when it comes to handstand push-ups. So a little bit of a soapbox there, but I've been praying for that to be moved into competitive situations more often. I love seeing it. So Mike, anything you got? We're getting close to the end here. I want to make sure you get a last question if you got one.
I mean, handstand push-ups, I'm right there with you, Brent. So I've been a part of Team Power Monkey for a very long time now. And the one thing I can maybe give you some affirmations for, I don't think it matters how good your strict press gets. It's not going to help your handstand push-up. So Dave and I have equal strict presses. Dave's strict any variation of handstand push-ups is tenfold better than mine. So he definitely has some type of secret in there that works, because strict press, we're right there.
Not strict press. It's not strict press.
So I just,
how much do you guys weigh?
Well, that's the thing too. I'm heavier than
you weigh
Dave,
a lot more than me, Mike. Yeah.
But it's not, I've weighed within 10 pounds of him before, and my handstand push-up hasn't changed at all, whether I'm 10 pounds heavier than Dave or 30 pounds heavier than Dave.
I can do basically one rep. My 1 rep max is right at my body weight with a strict press. And I've done almost 70 strict freestanding handstand push-ups in a row. So there's not an equal 1-to-1.
No.
Basically, I would say that if you're training to better those handstand push-ups, there are better ways to do it than working on variations of strict press. But it sounds like you're tackling it from every direction possible, so we don't need to get into it too much.
But I've tried just, and everything works. Nothing works forever is kind of probably my best piece of advice, where I've, you do something for, 6-week block and you'll see an improvement, and then you kind of have to move to something else. And there's like some core tenets that have definitely helped. But, there's definitely, like, I don't think I can, I've been working on, I don't think I can strict press my body weight. No, I wouldn't be able to. Whereas I have trained with guys that are good at handstand push-ups, and we'll be doing, 5 sets of 20 kettlebell strict press, and they're lighter than me and they're grabbing heavier kettlebells. And you're like, well, there's got to be, that's definitely part of the equation.
It doesn't help that you're built like a swimmer and have, is your wingspan longer than 6'2", your height? I'm sure your arms are like enormously long. So obviously you don't have advantageous levers when it comes to those pushing actions. But
definitely part of it.
Mike, you mentioned you might have a weightlifting question. I don't want to jump off here without at least giving you a chance to ask a weightlifting question if you got one.
Oh man, no, it's everything would be out of context now. I like the Brent, I've been a weightlifter since I was 11 years old, and now I'm 36, so I've got you by a few years here. The one question I had for you, and you answered it a little bit earlier when you'd said, you've been competing for 10 years or so, and you definitely don't see yourself competing 10 years from now. But I am curious, could you see yourself competing in a masters division at some point?
If I was to answer yes or no right now, I'd probably say no. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't, that's easy to say now. Like the reason why do I do CrossFit? it's challenging, right? It's challenging. And I think when the time comes that don't feel like I can compete at kind of a top level, or maybe it's not financially viable to competing to be my like kind of primary source of income, I'd want to do something that's really like fulfilling and challenging. And I'm not convinced that competing as a master for me would fill that. And I know, like, I'd still, if I did that, I would still want to dedicate a lot of myself to the training and to make sure I was competitive and doing the absolute best I could. And I talked to, like, I think it was, I won't say because I'm not exactly sure. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but it was someone who used to be a games athlete, and they took some time off, and then they turned 36, and they were like thinking about doing the masters thing. And they're just like, you know what, like, I've got these other things in my life that are just more important, and I know the amount of time I would need to spend, and it would kind of feel like just like an echo or a shadow of what I used to do in the individual open men's category. And so they chose not to. And I get the feeling that would likely be how I would feel given at that time, whether that's exactly when I turned 35 or 36 or 40 or something like that. But I could very easily, turn around on what I just said and compete as a master, so,
I think,
but right now it's definitely not part of the plan to be like, oh, I'll give it 4 more years at this, and then I'll definitely just jump straight into masters. It's definitely not the plan. If I had to give you a plan, it's like, I'm going to compete in kind of till the wheels fall off, and then, probably do, something else, and, start a business, or, be part of some company to try to reach some goal, and put my efforts there, and then just stay fit on the side.
it's interesting to hear that, and maybe from our side of things, Annie Sakamoto's kind of a part of our family and close-knit crew, and she's helped with a lot of the podcasts too. She would probably offer some interesting perspective where her best training from when I've talked with her has been when she transitioned to, like, I'm just doing this for fun now. And oh, wow, look, I'm actually PRing some lifts. I'm beating some of my times from when I was in my 30s, and now I'm in my 40s and have 2 kids playing sports, and I'm going to watch them play sports instead of doing the second training session. And I think even Dave and Fabian have been talking about when they quit training full time, there's like a interesting layover effect or lag of, like, you de-stress, you keep a lot of the strength and the skill, and then all of a sudden sometimes you have surprising results with a lot less effort and energy put in. It's not to say that that's maintained forever, but yeah, it'll be I guess fun for us to see how long your wheels stay on. And then if you get some wheels in the master's years, not that you would need to by any means, but it's an interesting thing, I think, for somebody like you that is pretty thoughtful and self-aware, what those thoughts will develop into as the years continue to accumulate.
Yeah, it's some days, like yesterday I had 2 just great sessions. Like, everything went well. I was seeing progress in all the little things I worked on that day, and I was like, holy man, like, I'd have a day like this, and I'm like, I could win the games, I could do this forever, and then some days you have these days where you're like, this is it, I quit. Yeah. But I think that's been I had those days
That's
when I was 22, that's the norm, right? It's the rule of thirds. You got a third of the training days are great, and the third are okay or bad, and then the third are really bad, and more or less that's kind of the mix, right? So,
well, we know you're on a little bit of a time crunch, Brent. We want you to get out of here, but really quick, some last minute questions, quick ones for if you're up for it.
Yeah.
First one, what sport or discipline do you prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics?
Probably say weightlifting.
Yes, of course. Please don't make us get a drum roll there. This should be quick, Brent.
It's close.
Give me a point. All right. It's close. He's got a wife who does gymnastics, so he's got to at least give some love there. Question number 2, any guests that you think would be good for us to have on the podcast?
I should give you an answer that's
This one's always tough, so if you need some more time, we can put it in the notes later on if nobody comes to mind.
I'll put it in the notes. I'll give it some you know what I think would be interesting? I'd say 2 things. One, finding a CrossFit athlete that maybe people aren't as like fan of anymore, but had like a good run in the early days and maybe had a drop off. And like, I'm always curious as to someone who, like, it kind of sucks because I don't want to, like, drag someone's name through the dirt or like, use their pain for your profit. But it's like someone who maybe had like a good year or two and then had a drop off, and like what happened. And not to like rub it, but just maybe for someone else to learn from that mistake. It's like, did you train too much? Did you let the hype get to you? Did you realize now that you were just lucky those 2 years and everything just kind of fell into place? What would you do differently? And then on the inverse, I think interviewing like a coaches, but maybe not there's a coach locally here who coaches a few athletes that are just hoping to get to semis, and I hang out with them and stuff. And so someone like that, where it's one thing to interview like Shane Orr or Ben Bergeron. It's like they have these like famous athletes, but I think it's interesting to like get with a coach that's like in the trenches kind of thing, and really like working with like the mid-level athletes. And like the very we talked about programming, and I tell him what I'm doing, and he looks at it and he's like, this is just so different to anything I'd give my athletes, because it's like for them, he's like, they're just weak and they're not fit. So like it's almost
these are people trying to go to semis too, by the way.
Yeah. Well, but he's like, they just have these like their weaknesses are so much more glaring. Where it's like, oh, like you're Brent, you suck at handstand push-ups. It's like, yeah, but you can do like 20, 30 whatever in a row kipping restrict, and then you can do like 50 kipping, so it's like you're not that bad at them.
It's all relative.
It's all relative. So where he's like, I have athletes that want to make semis and they could, but like right now there's these couple skills or this certain type of fitness that's just like shockingly not up to par. So I don't know. I think it's interesting, like hearing from someone like that and like their experiences, and a lot of it's more like emotional, because for me is when you're coaching someone like me, it's very much like Brent, like you need to handle your emotions, and then just, you can, and you will, and you're going to train twice a day. And for other people, he's like, just like, I'll program for them and they just won't do anything. I'm like, what happened? Oh, I was tired. Oh.
Okay.
Anyway,
I think that's a great suggestion. I like that one. And it kind of probably would hit really strongly with our community, who are probably more in the athlete space that are trying to achieve that similar thing. So that might be a really good suggestion there. Last one here. Any book or TV show that you come across recently that might be a good one for our listeners to pick up?
I always recommend Atomic Habits is just a good book. Probably the best self-help book I've ever read. It's just very, very actionable. There's not a lot of waffling around, and there's not a lot of repeating the same things, which a lot of self-help books have. Like it's like 200 pages that basically could be covered in 2 paragraphs. And then TV shows. Well, I mean, it's kind of like, do I just tell them something funny to watch?
No, just what did you say before we came on?
Okay, so I'll say my favorite comedy of all time, if you've never seen it, is What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh, it's amazing. It's so
a movie,
good.
and then they turned it into a TV show. TV show's fine, but the movie is like the best comedy. What We Do in the Shadows. I think it's just one of the best comedies I've ever seen.
It's good for Halloween time too. Yeah.
Yes, it is. That's right. Yeah. That's a Halloween. You still got the echoes of that in early November. And then watched a good movie I think it's on Netflix. It's I think it's a Bollywood movie. It's called RRR or Triple R. And it's just like classic action adventure, feel good versus evil. And it's just a good time. So I thought that was a pretty cool foreign movie too, which is always kind of, there's, I think either subtitles or dubbed, which, but definitely worth watching. A lot of fun.
We'll add it to the list. Thank you, Brent, for those suggestions.
Yes,
well, before we finish up, anything you got coming up, anything you want our listeners to know about, where they can find you?
Yeah, I mean, follow me on Instagram, and I'll be competing in Egypt, Dubai, Wadapalooza. So, get your tickets or watch the live stream. I don't think Egypt has a live stream, but Dubai and Wadapalooza will. So watch those live streams and, click like and subscribe, because, you got to support the competitions that make the sport go. And that's pretty much it.
What's the handle?
Weakness. Oh, I'm at Fikowski. So just my last name on Instagram. Great. And then, if you're looking for programming, check out the Professor Project, or check out Train Your Weakness if you're trying to get like a skill. If you're like, oh, I still suck at double unders, there's like some programs on there, or get your first ring muscle up kind of thing. And some programs on there for you to try.
Perfect. Well, Brent, thank you so much for the time today. It was great to finally get a chance to chat with you. Hope we can get you at the Power Monkey Camp at some time in the future. We'd love to have you there while, whether you're an athlete, whether you're not, I think you'd get a really fun experience out of the whole thing. It's a blast. For the rest of you out there, all of our listeners, please head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for services and upcoming events. Check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Mike Service, and at Dave Durante. On behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your hosts. I am Dave Durante with my co-host Mike Service. And until next time, thank you all for listening.